belong, each and every one. All of us belong in this sacred circle. All of us belong, each and every one. All of us belong in this sacred circle. We are sisters, brothers, children in one family of God. We are sisters, brothers, children in one family of God. All of us belong, each and every one. All of us belong in this sacred circle. All of us belong, each and every one. All of us belong in this sacred circle.
Welcome to Homecoming, each and every one of you, each of us with God and all of us together in spiritual family. And a very special and warm welcome to you, Elizabeth. Good morning to you. Happy Sunday morning. And of course, some of our participants are coming in from places far away where it's evening, but I think it's still Sunday. So welcome to all of us. Welcome to Homecoming. Our conversation today is focused on really, I think, rather an interesting phenomenon, and it really relates quite centrally to this way of living in spiritual family relationships. And that is the phenomenon of faith, right? And apparently, faith is the one thing that only we can do. God does all kinds of things for us. Really, God provides everything for us. This reality, our very selves, free will, I mean, all the things we've been talking about, love, and this experience of spiritual family relationships. God provides all of it for us. But the one thing that we have to do to engage in all of this is to exercise our faith in all of it. And we'll be looking at that, how we do that. So we're going to look at the nature of faith. Is it something that we possess? Is it like a possession? Like I have faith in God and then I put it up on the shelf? Or is it more a kind of action or a series of actions actually that we engage in? And we'll also take a look at what the great spiritual realities are that we have the opportunity to dive into and participate in with our faith. But before we launch into that whole conversation, let's first take a little bit of time, as we usually do, to enjoy some worship, which I guess in a sense is the most fundamental act of faith. Because what we're saying to God is, not only do I believe that you exist, but I actually want to be with you. I want to join with you in this loving embrace where we and God are held together in God's love in worship. So let's get quiet and move our awareness to that place where God is, in the deepest place inside of us. Let's take a few moments to rest in God with love. Thank you, great God. You who are spiritual family in your initial creative burst in becoming the father of the eternal mother son and together becoming the parents of the infinite spirit, the initial manifestation of these remarkable family relationships. And then for creating that as the pattern of all of reality that even we can participate in down here at the bottom of existence, spiritually speaking. So thank you. Amen. we're going to start with this question. Is faith a noun or is faith a verb? It's kind of interesting to think of it that way. Is faith something we have, like a possession, or is it something that we actually do? More like a set of ongoing decisions and actions that we initiate and then we persist in this set of activities, really, spiritual activities. And I have actually come to understand faith much more in this second way, as a continuous set of actions that we engage in. In other words, as we mature spiritually, what I think is going on is we are exercising our faith more and more fully. I like that verb, to exercise or to manifest or to set into motion. So we're acting out, in a sense, what we have faith in repeatedly and more powerfully as we proceed. So let's take a look now at a key passage on faith. So what the revelators are saying, and this is actually Jesus speaking to us directly, Jesus says, forget not. This is important. Keep this in mind. It is your personal faith in the exceedingly great and precious promises of God that ensures you're becoming partakers of the divine nature. That's a pretty astonishing statement. It's one I come back to a lot. So initially for me, there's a very significant question, and that is, what are these exceedingly great and precious promises of God that Jesus is referring to, that we're supposed to have faith in, right? What are they? Um, I actually think they are the central spiritual truths of the gospel. And for our purposes, and in our modern context, in terms of how to understand it and hold these central realities, I think they can best be understood and worked with in this symbolism here of the family way. It's a way of living in a set of spiritual family relationships. And I think looking at this symbolism, there is a reason that faith is the final element in this way of understanding and working with the gospel. In a sense, faith is the catalyst. I think it's the thing that only we can do that engages us with each one of these other six realities: the spiritual parent-child relationship, the spiritual sister-brother relationships we have with each other, the experience of the intimate interior sharing of the inner life with God. Uh, we have to manifest faith to enter into any one of these and experience them, right? The will of God, the manifestation of love with God and with each other, and the experiencing of our existence as stretching way beyond this initial life into an eternal journey of making these realities real in our experience. So faith is the catalyst for each of these. So as an example, when we focus our faith on the spiritual parent-child relationship, what are we actually doing? This is an interesting question. What does it mean to exercise our faith in a reality like this parent-child relationship we have with God? I think, in a sense, this is my best way of understanding it. What we are doing is, in a sense, we are pouring ourselves into this experience. We move into it and we engage with that spiritual reality. We actually enter into that living relationship with our spiritual parent. And progressively, what we do is we inhabit it experientially, right? We begin to experience it. And we can't do that alone. God really gives us this experience. We'll be looking at this just a little further on, but the initiation of it is ours to engage in. The faith step of saying, I want to be in this and I want to engage in this and experience it, that's something that only we can do, right? And I think what happens is that as we more and more fully live into that reality over time, and I think we're talking about weeks and months and really years and decades of steady investment in these experiences, they start to come alive and become realities in a way that are not theoretical. They're living experiential realities. And I think as we more fully live into that reality over time, we increasingly become that reality in partnership with God. And that is sort of what I think they are describing in the second part of this passage down here below, where they say, thus by your faith and the Spirit's transformation, you become in reality the temples of God, and his Spirit actually dwells within you. So I think what's going on is that the initial act is for us to have faith in these realities, these great gifts which God has given us. And having faith in them means that we begin to engage with them, live within them, and then I think on that faith foundation that only we can initiate, something very powerful begins to happen that is not our doing. The Spirit can begin to change us, to transform us, so that we can increasingly, as they say, partake of the divine nature. God begins a transformative process that increasingly makes us more like God. Uh, so that's why faith is so critical, though, as the entrance. It's the expression of our desire. And on the basis, the fulcrum of that act of will, of saying, I want to experience these things. I want to live in this way. I want this to become the pattern for my days and my months and my years. God can begin a transformative process based on the foundation of that intention on our part. So, in a sense, what we have faith in, what we devote ourselves to, or what we pour ourselves into, with the help of the Spirit, and really with the action of the Spirit, which is critical. We can't do this ourselves. The Spirit begins progressively to shape and dominate who we are and what we are steadily becoming. This passage has always intrigued me. What we have faith in motivates our lives, right? It begins to shape and dominate everything about the way that we live. And that's just natural. And that's because we desire it. The act of faith is initially an act of desiring something and then wanting to move into it, and God helping us to actually move into and become these realities. So the last passage I'd like to look at before I turn it over to Elizabeth is this one, which is a very powerful and somewhat startling statement for me. It always is. Every time I read it, it's very impactful. Religion does need new leaders, spiritual men and women who will dare to depend solely on Jesus and his incomparable teachings. The spiritual renaissance must await the coming of these new teachers of Jesus' religion who will be exclusively devoted to the spiritual regeneration of men and women. So, we might ask, what does this have to do with faith, that passage? Well, I think in a sense, that statement, it's a pretty audacious statement, right? To imagine that we are supposed to become these new leaders. Because I don't know about you, I feel most of the time quite inadequate to that kind of a task. But what they're saying, they're implying is that we little human beings are supposed to become these new leaders who are exclusively devoted to the spiritual regeneration of humanity. But the bottom line is, if not us, then who? Right? I mean, we're the ones reading this revelation. We have the sense of imperative, and they've given us all the tools for us to become those new leaders and teachers. But I think it's only by the steady mobilization of our faith. And this for me is key. Throughout our lives, this is not something that happens in a day or a week. It's something that happens as the culmination of decades of faith manifestation. But it's more than that. I think it's a phenomenon they're describing that will happen over many generations. Um, and I think we can begin, though, the process of actually engaging in this experience of addressing this goal. Now, I mean, obviously, I think no single one of us is capable of addressing this goal alone. But I think if we mobilize our faith in growing numbers, I think if each one of us simply does our own small part, if we each invest our energies faithfully in these great spiritual realities and we allow God to progressively transform us, then I think eventually there will be hundreds and thousands of these new spiritual leaders that they're speaking of. And the reality is, it has to start somewhere. And the reality is, I believe it has to start with us, even here with our very humble beginnings. So that's probably enough from me. I'd like to go ahead and turn it over now to
Oh,
Elizabeth and for some of her thoughts on the nature of faith and the role that it plays in our personal spiritual lives, and also maybe the role that it can play in the spiritual transformation of our world. Please, Elizabeth.
thank you. Thank you, Marvin.
Yeah.
Again, as always, every week for leading us in this exploration of the seven core spiritual truths, which I think our minds and our souls revel in thinking about and understanding more and more. And I want to thank everybody here who's gathered. You've taken time out of a precious Sunday to be here in a spiritual family experience, to join us in loving God, knowing God more and more, and loving each other more and more. And I got to say, faith got me here this morning because I had a really bad night. My husband is very sick and it was a rather sleepless night. And I really felt I couldn't do this morning. I almost wanted to text you, Marvin, and say, I can't do it. And then I remembered, there's one in me who can. And so every moment, every day.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and when we gather like this too, we get something from it that is sustaining, that I think is very critical for all of us.
Yeah.
And I hear you, Elizabeth. Life can be
Although we get
very
to
challenging.
realize that. And truly, when we ask for that help, it comes, it rises in us. It never fails if we really ask for that. And, through the study of the faith of Jesus and the deep exploration of these seven spiritual truths, I really have come to understand the power and the magnitude of faith more and more. I often think back to, being a little child in New York City, going to Catholic school, studying the catechism. And, those concepts were really engraved in my little baby soul. And when we were asked, well, why did God make us? The answer was loud and clear. God made me to know him and to love him and to serve him in this world and the next.
Hmm.
And if I had to measure the level of the meaning and value that these words had for me when I was 7 or 8 years old, I would say maybe it was just like an inch deep. And I dare say that many people in this room, had a similar experience when they were children. And I know that even people who were not raised in a religious household report experience when they were little children of having a sense of something bigger, of a creator source for our existence. And this is the work of the Spirit in us, informing the child's mind. And we know we can associate this early consciousness, awareness of something bigger than us from the arrival of the indwelling Spirit of God in us sometime when we're 5 or 6 years old. And remember, just prior to that, our little baby minds were encircuited in the Holy Spirit of the infinite Spirit, of the Mother Spirit, which immediately, fostered this sense of seeking for truth in us. And then comes the thought gesture, the bestowal of the fragment of God in our superconscious mind. And then we become open and receptive to the work of the Spirit of truth as we live on. So from this crucial moment in our childhood, faith receives this gift of a triple guidance system from the Paradise Trinity. And shout out to Kay and Bill Cooper and those who work with them to bring a greater understanding of the work of this, Trinity guidance system within our being. Thank you. And we see that the spirits of the Father, the Son, and the Infinite Spirit work together as a unified spiritual influence with the help of our seraphic guardians, right? And the tremendous activity of the adjutant mind spirits of worship and wisdom. And hopefully the work of these spirits of God will be augmented by a good home environment in which a child can thrive and respond positively to these spiritual forces by making good spiritual moral decisions. This is the activity of faith. But we know, sadly, that this is not always the case. Nevertheless, these spiritual forces never cease to work for the enlightenment and the betterment of every child and every adult. And so this process, of psycho-spiritual formation continues as the child grows through these successive stages of physical, intellectual, emotional, moral, and spiritual development. But this, early enlightenment of childhood is often really covered over by just to me, it's just layers of material existence, often traumatic, and belief systems, which can really impair our ability to discern these spiritual influences, which is why the work that Kay and Bill and others are doing is so important to bring us more into attunement and recognition of these spiritual forces and use them, more creatively in our lives. But, even if this stuff our early enlightenment is layered over, with material existence, there still we come to a moment, I think, many of us, most of us in our life, where we start asking the big questions of life. We need to know, where did I come from? What am I doing here? Where am I going? Life after death, the mystery of God. Who is our creator? Who are we really? And so that's, to me, when faith becomes a much more dynamic force. I love this verb, mobilize. I associate that with faith. Faith is mobilizing all the powers inherent in our personalities.
It's energizing.
It is. I feel it. It's so good to have this conversation with all of you, because we can right now be mobilizing this to higher levels in ourself and transform this day into a holy day. So this faith becomes more mighty and sterling, I think, when we can believe in God's eternal promises without seeing God, without seeing celestial beings. When we persevere when our planet is isolated from the rest of the universe, right? And when we triumph over unbearable difficulties in our lives, when we're alone. Of course, faith also leads us to questioning and doubting, but doubting is part of the process, I think, of reaching for higher and higher levels of truth discernment. We seek for God, don't we, in the dark of our human experience, and we find the light and love of God in ourselves and in others. And as this faith grows, like Marvin was saying, through our religious experiences and the wisdom that we acquire through the moments of our human living, it begins to pervade our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. It begins to shape our decisions moment by moment. We begin to really align with God's way of being, and that's good. It's full of love. And, the Spirit in us informs us, rings all the bells that this is true. This path of faith in God is true. And then eventually we, live long enough, we'll begin to see the fruits of this faithful living. We will grow more steady, more centered, more solid in our faith. We'll begin to just appreciate truth, more and more. The faith that was maybe an inch thick when we were little becomes maybe a mile thick at this point in our lives. And then you know what? Our truth discerning minds. Remember, faith has led us on this voyage of discovery, using reason and wisdom. And then finally, we're here, right, with truth. We are journeying with truth and seeing the infinity that lies. We're beginning to taste it. Just glimpse this infinity that lies beyond us. But we know that we know, even when someone belittles our experience. This is, to me, one of the great proofs of God is our religious experience that we acquire from direct experience and from faith that we are the children of God. We know that we know. So everyone, just like I urge myself, carry on even when life is tough. Just love God and remember who we are, love each other, serve one another with God, mobilize everything we have in us to reach for higher and higher ground. I love you all. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I am always inspired and changed by what you share. It's impactful. Thank you so much. And I so much appreciate your collaborating together with me in this endeavor at Homecoming. Life is hard. Life is not easy. What you say, what it reminds me of, our lives are so multi-layered with so many different things coming and going, many of them very difficult, very challenging times in all of our lives. And so I return to that passage because every element in that passage, which is in the section on lesson in self-mastery, where Jesus is speaking to us, and he begins that passage by saying, "Forget not." There's a reason for that. And that's because it is our nature and life is so challenging. It is very easy for us to become distracted, overwhelmed, and forgetful because we have to deal with so many things in our human material lives of necessity. So Jesus starts that off by saying, remember this often and often. Forget it not. Keep going back to this. It is your
Yes.
personal faith in the exceedingly great and precious promises of God, these great realities of spiritual family life, right? That ensures that we can progressively become like God, partake of the divine nature. And then he says this really critically important thing. Thus, by your faith and the Spirit's transformation, which is a cumulative, lifelong, and eternal phenomenon, the Spirit, we've just begun this journey of
Yeah.
spiritual transformation that God is moving us through. And we need to steadily apply our faith repeatedly, over and over, in all the circumstances of life, so that the Spirit has access to us and can change us in this way, cumulatively. So I so much appreciate everything you've shared. We're going to move now into this remarkable experience of worship, right? For 8, 9, 10 minutes. And we're going to express our faith in the presence of God and God's transformative action in the midst of this unitive experience of worship, of loving God and being loved by God, and allowing God's Spirit in so many forms to transform us, to uplift us, and to move us forward and sustain us. So let's take a little bit of time here in worship, say about. Go ahead, sit back, relax, be comfortable, take a few deep breaths, and let's take some time to rest in God's presence with love. Thank you, Father, for your presence in the very center of each of us, the very center of whom each of us is, your indwelling spirit. And thank you for your presence on Paradise, drawing us forward in the eternal journey through the cosmos, this journey of spiritual growth, where you are our companion, moving ever forward, ever inward to your presence at the center of all things. We thank you, eternal Mother, Son, and infinite Spirit. We thank you, Jesus, our wonderful Master, our friend, our close companion as the Spirit of truth. We thank you, Mother Spirit, for all of your ministries to us, the sustenance of our bodies, the inspiration and the liveliness of our minds, the growth, the emergence of our spiritual souls. You minister to us on all levels. And we thank you for the remarkable ministry of your children, our wonderful angelic sisters who are here with us, helping us along in our spiritual journey. And we thank you, great God, the Supreme, in whom we are having this experience, this evolving experience of growth with God together in the universe, making our small but cumulative contributions in faith. Amen. Well, that was pretty cool and very critical, critical for us to be sustained in worship, to have God's energies flow into us, fill us, and give us the reserves we need to live this life. And God is doing that all the time. So we're going to move now into our breakout sessions. And before I do, I'm going to copy these questions and I'm going to put them in the chat box. So, how has your faith grown and developed over the years and decades of your faith journey? How has that changed you? How have you applied your faith in relation to the great central truths of the gospel? And lastly, what challenges have you experienced in attempting to act out your faith more powerfully, and how have you overcome those challenges? So, this is all about the faith journey. So, Elizabeth, let's go ahead
We're ready. Yep.
yeah, move you into breakout groups for
Everyone click on join. Click
yeah,
on the
about
join.
20 minutes.
How much?
Oh, let's go 18.
Okay. Let me just make sure I have.
Let's go ahead and we'll begin our conversation here in the large group gathering. And as usual, I've got a couple of announcements. And as usual, I just put in the chat box these two links, right? And these are useful, right? The first one is the link to the homecoming page on the Urantia University website, which describes homecoming and what we're about. And the reason I share these with you every week is you can copy these links. If you click on them, you can either copy them and paste them somewhere, or click on them, they'll open in a browser on your computer. Is we really want to grow our audience as much as possible. So if you can share these around, the second link is to the playlist with all of our recordings, and we have 11 up there. This will be the 12th. Um, and so yeah, please share them around. And see if there's anyone you think might benefit from showing up here on Sunday mornings for homecoming, or who might really benefit from watching these recordings on some of the particular subjects or even all of them. So, in a sense, we put out the invitation for you all to become partners in our ministry with us with homecoming. That said, I think we'll move now into our large group. So let's get into conversation, and I'm actually going to sort of invite folks who to share um, around this question of how is it that faith is manifested in your life? How have you mobilized it, initiated it? How do you work with faith as a phenomenon in your personal spiritual experience? So how do you inaugurate it, set it in motion in relation to the core experiences of this way of life and spiritual family relationships? And then what has been your experience with the way that the Spirit responds transformatively in your life? Uh, so again, we're looking at how faith works, how we work with it, and how the Spirit works with that leverage that we give the Spirit in faith. Any thoughts on faith? How's that? How's that? And think about it in terms of the decades of your life, right? What has been the cumulative impact of this phenomenon that we get to exercise? This is ours. God can't exercise faith for us. That is our initiating step. So it's really quite a crucial thing for us to do. So we'll go to Bill and Kay, and then Mike and Sherry and others, please. I'll invite, Maureen, sometimes you don't share, but I know whenever you do in our study group, you always have very rich and helpful insights, very thoughtful, long-time student of the Revelation. Mike Hagan, as a matter of fact, Patrick, yes, wonderful to see you here, my brother. Go ahead, either Kay and or Bill.
Well, in our group, Angela was there, and she and I both were talking about an interesting kind of phenomenon in our lives, and that is that I don't remember the initiating of faith. I recall when I was in church camp as a teenager that being in a twilight setting and having a worship time outside with the beautiful trees and everything and the music is my first memory of really having that feeling of connection with God. And when I was a junior, senior in high school, one of my Sunday school teachers wanted us to realize that we were just accepting our parents' faith if we didn't have a doubt and overcome that. So I said, well, I'll entertain doubt. And something inside of me said, don't be silly. And that was the end of the doubt. It was so strong and so reassuring that I didn't need to deal with doubt in God anymore. And we may doubt ourselves, we may doubt our ability to go forward, and have to call on God to give us the strength to go forward, to help us decide whether we can take on this challenge or not. But there's no doubt for me in God or in God's ability to do that if I feel that I'm being supported in that way.
A quick question. The description that you shared right at the beginning, where it was like an evening time and you had that first experience of faith. How old were you, if you recollect?
That was in probably early junior high, maybe 8th grade or something like that. It was the first time that we'd done that sort of thing at camp, and it really touched me. I'd been to camp earlier, but that's just kind of my first really things just bloomed at that point for me. Really,
so 11, 12,
yeah,
11, yeah, that neighborhood. Interesting.
yeah. I
Very
know a lot of
interesting.
people have an earlier experience, and I remember church and everything, but that was the first time I remember that blooming inside of me, a feeling of connection with God, and just
it changed things.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love the other thing you shared, Kay, which is all the ridiculousness of the doubt. It's just like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Don't need to spend any time with that.
Yeah.
Which is, all of us have different paths,
Oh, yeah.
It's really different ones of
I
us.
don't talk about that very much because I know that people have a different experience of that. I just wanted to share that with my family here because it was one of those amusing things in my youth.
Yes, yes. And Bill, I see you look like you do have something you want to add. Go ahead,
Yeah,
please.
I've got too much that I want to add. I'll try to cut it down.
Bill,
I
please.
recounted something yesterday in a session we were doing that occurred in our lives, and that was when we first started reading the Urantia book. I was reading back and forth between the Jesus papers and the earlier papers in order to try to get myself to read the earlier papers because the Jesus papers were easier for me to read than the nature of God or the foreword or whatever. The early parts of the book were truly foreign, and Jesus was less so for me. And what I recounted was that I would be reading to Kay, and I would read something about Jesus's life or Jesus's attitudes or Jesus's teachings, and there would be tears streaming down my face.
Hmm.
And I would say to myself and her, oh my, can this possibly be true? And the immediate feeling of it, oh yes, it is true. Now, my nature is to always entertain a doubt. And the reason I do that is to try not to make mistakes about prioritizing what I want to be above what is true. Is I try not to fool myself by entertaining a doubt. That isn't to say that the doubt is really serious, but it is a question that goes through my mind of, is this true? And very, very often I get the impression, yes, it is.
Hmm.
And then it
A
is true.
sense of confirmation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So doubting is a method of confirmation. It's a method of thinking. It isn't a serious, oh, I've given up on God type doubt. It is a, can this wonderful thing be true? Can this fantastic thing be true? And very frequently, I get the confirmation of it. And other times, not so much so, and that remains open.
Hmm, hmm.
I'll stop with
Thank,
that.
yeah, thank you, Bill. Uh, I haven't thought about this for a while. I had a very good friend many years ago. Many of you know him, David Gray. Uh, and David had a mind much like yours, Bill. And they describe one of the apostles, the doubting Thomas, someone who was a very critical thinker and often scientific in their temperament. And the term that came to me was David Gray is a contrapuntal thinker. He,
I've
th-
Contra,
never heard of that.
he thinks in counterpoint to what is being shared or presented. And there are some people who are very much like that. For
yeah.
every thought or thing that gets shared with them, they think, "Oh, well, wait a second, what's the argument against this?" And that's good. There's a critical element that really examines reality at some depth, but it is interesting for someone who's a contrapuntal thinker to work with the dynamics of faith. And you described it very nicely. It is an experience of doubting and presenting the doubt and getting confirmation at a really bottom level, a fundamental level, that yes, indeed, what I sense is true and my mind has natural doubts. It is indeed true. So, anyways, I really appreciate your sharing. Thank you, Bill. Um, I hadn't thought about it, but you are one of my buddies who is a contrapuntal thinker, which is great.
I think
Which is
so.
Yeah, which is great. Which is great. Um, so we're gonna go. I did want to share one other thing in relation to what you were sharing, Kay, and that is when I look back to my initial experience of faith, I was probably about 15, 16, I think. And I have been engaged in spiritual search in yoga, mostly in Eastern philosophies. And I remember very powerfully an experience at the UCLA campus, lying down on the ground, looking up at the trees, at the sky. It was an afternoon, and having an intense feeling of wanting to know what was going on in the big picture. And that to me is the earliest manifestation of what I would call faith for me. It was a desire. And I do think the initial manifestation of faith is hunger or desire and conscious wanting to understand spiritual reality, even though you don't even know how to phrase the question. There's an emptiness that it says, I want this filled. And that to me is the initial, what it was for me was the initial manifestation of faith. And I wasn't like you. Many people grew up with a solid faith grounding spiritually. I didn't have that, you know. I grew up with more questions than assumptions. So anyways, let's just add it to the mix. We're going to go to Mike, Sherry, and then Mike Hagan. Go ahead, Mike.
Hi, everybody. So, when I was about 11, my family converted to Roman Catholicism, and initially I was probably more Catholic than the Pope, as the expression goes, really got into it. By the time I was in the service after high school and started college, and by this point I just had too many questions, too many doubts. But I remember my prayer at that time was, God, don't let me lose my faith. Now I realize that my prayer was answered because I never lost my faith. What I lost was my belief and a creed. And that's just like an old skin, so to speak, that I shed. But God kept me in his hands, so to speak, to continue the search and to look for something better. And which, of course, I found through the Urantia book. So that distinction between faith and belief or creed became very apparent to me. So now, to give a paraphrase, in the book it says, in the end, there is but one struggle, the struggle of faith against doubt. And I think about that now in every little decision that I make. If I choose to look at situations and get discouraged or let them bring me down, or if I look at them and say, in spite of those, God is good and the universe is good. So in all of these decisions in life, we are facing that choice. And then I think of my interactions. You know, everybody that I meet, if I smile, if I say hello, offer them any sort of kindness whatsoever, it is not only reaffirming my faith, but it's reaffirming their faith that in their struggle, that whether the universe is good, whether God is really there and is really a loving God. So all of those acts of being positive are contributing to my faith, and I feel like I can serve others by contributing to their faith by, showing them whatever kindness and goodness that I can.
Hmm. Hmm. The 2 points, yeah, that you shared, both of them very, very lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Uh, some of you know that I did several years of research in the Ranch book on the socialization of religion, and there was a principle that emerged, one of the many, many principles that emerged out of that research that was about 40 years ago, that really is related to what you were sharing, Mike, about the beliefs falling away, but what you have faith in persisting. And there was a sort of a little fairly simple summary of that principle. Truths persist, forms adapt. Truths persist, forms adapt. And I would add truths persist, beliefs can change and adapt. But what is true and what is real what is perennial in the way of spiritual truth, it's lasting. It doesn't change. Its form and its expression may grow and adapt, but it remains constant, I think, because it's an eternal reality. So when I look at those core truths of the way of life and the family of God, those realities, I think how they manifest may change endlessly, but those realities will persist forever because I think each of them is a paradise level phenomenon. So that's how it's very connected for me in what you shared. Our particular understandings are going to go through endless transformation, but the realities underlying them will persist, that we have faith in, these great truths. I don't know if you want to say anything back in response, but I mean, that's what it made me think of. Thank you,
Well,
Mike.
truth is truth.
Truth is truth.
So
That's right. Thank you. Sherry, and then Mike Hagan.
Thank you. Oh, what wonderful conversation. I just bouncing off Mike, a painter, I just realized that a good friend of mine who's a minister, Unity minister, she's often saying when we have our various challenges in life, she said, take the time to pause and see what is the underlying spiritual truth behind this situation.
Hmm.
And lots of different ways for us to kind of do and say the same thing, but that one has kind of stuck with me because it's very pragmatic. It's very pragmatic to say, what's the underlying spiritual truth behind this? And then that can almost immediately change the way we deal with things. I would just say briefly that my own spiritual journey or my journey with faith has, I'm sure like a lot of us, has been one of evolution. Faith, the word faith, what I think faith is, how I relate to faith, how I act out my faith and live it, has evolved from the time I was, 10, 11, 12 years old, where I became real conscious of making choices that had to do with faith. And perhaps like also some of us here, in the church situation, faith was almost a command, have faith or go to hell kind of a thing, although I wasn't raised quite so much in that, but faith was something you did because you were supposed to.
Mm-hmm. Oh, like
And
obedience.
it was an obedient, it was an
Yeah.
obligatory, obedient thing you did.
Yeah.
And now, of course, evolution and our wonderful revelation has wildly changed my understanding of faith. And I too, Marvin, and everyone agree that faith is an action. It's a verb. It's an action. It's something we do. But I also now really love relating to exercising faith as we would a muscle.
Hmm.
Take it out, take it out of your own little private thing, exercise your faith and you grow it. It gets stronger. It works for you better when you exercise faith like you would a muscle in your body or your intellect. And when we were in our breakout room, one thing several of us had in common was also the challenge at times, and sometimes it's particularly hard when it's in family members, of clinging to your faith and being willing to share it when family members don't share it.
Hmm.
And I had a particular situation about 10 years ago where a very close family member, in essence, mocked my faith journey and my spiritual journey, which crushed me. But it also was a little bit of a test. It was a challenge. It was that muscle building. It was like Jesus said, often members of your own family aren't your spiritual brothers and sisters. But you learn to overcome, you learn to love people as they are, but you do not give up your faith. And so the last thing I want to say is stating the obvious, but how valuable, how necessary it is to come together with your spiritual sisters and brothers to keep our faith strong, to remind us who we are, what we can do individually and together, and to inspire one another to keep going. Thank you.
That last is very important. Faith is not just an individual experience. There's something we do in community that is very powerful for confirming what it is we have faith in. And that really plays a part in each of our personal spiritual lives. So I think that's a very valuable emphasis. Thank you, Sherry. Uh, I also, one other insight in relation to encountering people whose beliefs are different than our own and who will, quote, challenge our faith. I think they're challenging, as Mike was saying, our beliefs more than our faith. You know, the particulars of what we might believe in and what they might believe in. And it's always comforting for me to take the larger, it's not even the eternal viewpoint. It's just the survival to the next life viewpoint. Because what it comes down to is all of those superficial differences of belief will be reconciled and remedied in that higher life, right? Because we're going to be dealing with the reality of actual encounter with these higher spiritual realities on a level that we just have to faith grasp here in this life. So there will be a resolution to all of these differences of belief between ourselves and people we know and love. So that's comforting for me. Just be patient is what God is saying to us, I think. All things will be made right. Just hang on, do your thing the best you can here in your life, in your environment. So that's a part of it as well. Thank you, Sherry. There's this loop. I can't describe it any other way, where we initiate some faith expectation and request and prayer, right, in association with the Spirit. And I think based on that foundation, the Spirit goes through transformative work and responds to us and does things in us and in our spiritual lives. And part of what the Spirit does is to inspire us to act in ministry, right? To little ways, big ways, little ways, like what Mike Painter was saying, a kind word, a text to someone, writing a letters of inspiration was part of a ministry, doing homecoming, doing this, that, or the other, doing adventures in spiritual living, and classes on the soul, and all of the many things that we're doing, running study groups. There's this experience of getting a leading. You might do this. This is a possibility. And we're in this situation where to close the loop with that interaction with the Spirit, we need to act. And we can't, most of the time when we act, we have no idea whether it is from the Spirit, whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing. It feels right. It feels like there's truth, beauty, and goodness associated with that impulse. And I think that's another part of the faith journey is acting upon those impulses and inspirations and leadings, which we only vaguely sense. And I think as we act on them and we get used to doing that more and more often, the faculty of sensing that, confirming it, acting upon it grows in us cumulatively over time. That's been my experience. I hear it in what you're describing as well. It's a cumulative experience that I think happens for many of us literally over decades. So I don't think this is a transient or short-term experience. I think it's a cumulative experience. And I think it sets us up for much more service in the next life and more service here. So there is that part of the faith experience of saying, okay, I don't know if this is what you're leading me to do, but it feels like the right thing to do. So I'm going to go ahead and do it the best I can and leave the results to you. I'm not responsible for anything particular happening. I'm responsible for being as creative and innovative as I can be in responding to your sense of leading with me. And then whatever happens, it's none of it is bad. It's all to the good, right? So we don't need to be worried about the proportions or the success of it. We just need to engage in response to that, God's response to us when we extend our faith. So that's part of the whole thing as well, which is fascinating. It's a fascinating part of the whole journey. And what's even more fascinating to me is that we're just beginning, right? We're embryonic in this endeavor. This is going to pick up momentum in the next life and all the way through the eternal ascent. we'll be exercising faith on more and more robust levels and working with the Spirit in more and more robust ways. So that's thrilling to me. That's really exciting. The other thing I'd say, I don't know if you were here at the beginning of the session, but when we looked at what are the exceedingly great and precious promises of God that they reference in that passage, really my way of understanding those essential truths of the gospel all relate to a way of living in spiritual family relationships. So they would be the spiritual parent-child relationships. These are the promises, the great gifts that God is giving to us. The spiritual parent-child relationship we each can have with God, the spiritual sister-brother relationships we have with each other, the indwelling spirit, the gift of the indwelling spirit, and the intimacy of our relationship with God, the will of God, the sense of direction and purpose and forward motion and structure and coherence in the cosmos, all of which flows from God's will and our will in conjunction with God's will. The fifth great reality is love and the movement of love through our lives with God and with each other. The sixth one is eternal life, the promise of continuity, and the eternal journey of growth in spiritual family. And the last is what we've looked at today, and that is faith. Faith in the realization of all these other great spiritual gifts. So, and that's the essence of a way of life in the family of God, the family way, is those elements, central elements of the gospel.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, and if any of you are interested in the explication of those, go to familyofgodfellowship.org. Very simple, and you'll see a pretty full vision statement of that sense of the gospel. So, if for whoever is interested. So we've had a very full conversation, very rich conversation. I want to thank you all for taking your time and being here and participating together in this lovely sharing. Let's take a moment and offer up who we are and our recent sharing here to God's presence within us and among us, and ask for integration and expansion, transformation around these great truths. Let's take a moment in worship. Thank you, great God, our wonderful, challenging, and creative Father, and our nurturing, sustaining, and supportive Mother, our wonderful parental God, for creating us as your children, offering us the opportunity of a never-ending relationship with you in spiritual growth as we mature in your universe, moving forward in this eternal journey of spiritual progression that you are offering us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Amen. Well, lots of love to you all, and we will join again next Sunday in Homecoming. In the meantime, stay connected, stay spiritually connected, stay in the journey with God and in fellowship with God all the time. And we will see you the next time we gather. Lots of love.
Love you all.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.